Fluorescent hum, snow and slow fall. A boy rubs sleep from his eyes. A black hood drips meltwater by the threshold. Heavy boots cross the tile. The night narrows to one room. The gas station sat like a fluorescent island in the endless Iowa darkness, its parking lot dusted with snow that caught the light from overhead lamps and threw it back in crystalline fragments. Tessa pulled the Honda into the space closest to the building, her hands trembling only slightly as she turned off the engine. Beside her, Danny slept with his head against the passenger window, his breath fogging the glass in steady intervals. 13 years old and still small for his age, still trusting enough to sleep peacefully, while his mother drove them through the night toward a destination she couldn't name, following roads that led away from everything they'd ever known. "Danny," she touched his shoulder gently, "we need to stop for gas." He stirred, blinking in the harsh light. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe," she said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. There was no such place, not for them, not anymore, just for a few minutes. "We'll be back on the road soon." The cold hit them like a physical blow when they stepped outside. February in Iowa was a special kind of cruel. The kind of cold that found every gap in your clothing and settled there like a parasite. Tessa moved quickly to the pump, her senses hyper-alert, despite the fatigue that sat behind her eyes like lead weights. 3 other vehicles occupied the lot. A semi-truck idling near the back, diesel fumes mixing with the smell of snow and motor oil. A rusted pickup truck that belonged to someone who didn't have enough money for repairs but too much pride to give up. And a black SUV with tinted windows that made Tessa's skin crawl, though she couldn't say exactly why. "Mom?" Danny's voice was small in the vast cold. "I'm hungry." The words hit her harder than they should have. When had he last eaten? Really eaten? Not the vending machine crackers and stale sandwiches they'd been living on for the past week. She tried to remember and couldn't, which meant it had been too long. "We'll get you something inside, okay?" The gas station's interior was overly bright and smelled of hot dogs that had been rolling under heat lamps for far too long. A clerk with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Mike, glanced up from his magazine as they entered. Behind the counter, a small television played the late news with the volume turned low. Tessa gathered supplies while Danny wandered the snack aisles. Beef jerky, energy drinks, a bag of trail mix that cost twice what it should. Provisions for the road ahead, though she had no clear idea where that road would take them. Away was the only direction that mattered now. She was reaching for a bottle of aspirin when she heard the SUV's doors slam outside. 3 men entered together, and Tessa knew immediately that her week of running was over. They moved with the coordinated precision of people who had done this before, spreading out to cover the store's exits without seeming to do so deliberately. The first man, tall, lean, wearing a leather jacket despite the cold, approached the counter and smiled at Mike with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Evening," he said. "Cold one, isn't it?" Tessa kept her head down, pretending to study the ingredients on a candy bar while her mind raced through options. The rear exit was blocked by the second man, who browsed magazines with studied casualness. The third had positioned himself near the front door, ostensibly examining a display of motor oil. Danny appeared beside her, holding a bag of chips and a candy bar. "Mom, are we getting these?" "Put them back," she whispered, "now." But it was too late. The man in the leather jacket had heard Danny's voice and turned, his eyes finding Tessa's face with the satisfaction of someone who had been searching for a very long time. "Tessa Brennan," he said, and the sound of her name in his mouth made her skin feel like it was crawling with insects. "You've led us quite a chase." Mike the clerk looked confused, his gaze moving between Tessa and the strangers who had suddenly made his quiet gas station feel like a trap. "Is everything okay here?" "Everything's fine," Leatherjacket said without taking his eyes off Tessa. "We're just here to collect some property that belongs to our employer." "Property?" Mike's confusion deepened. "The woman and her son. They've been borrowed for some time now. We're here to return them to their rightful place." Tessa felt the familiar burn starting in her chest, the hunger that had been dormant for hours beginning to stir. She pressed her hand to her throat, feeling the pulse of blood beneath her fingers, and fought to keep the monster sleeping inside her from waking up. "Danny," she said quietly, "go stand behind the counter with Mike." "Mom?" "Just do it, now." Danny, sensing something in her tone that brooked no argument, moved quickly behind the counter. Mike backed away instinctively, his survival instincts finally beginning to engage despite his confusion. "There's nowhere to run, Tessa," Leatherjacket said. He reached into his jacket and produced something that caught the fluorescent light, a cross, silver and old, hanging from a chain. "Mr. Reeves is very disappointed in you. He offered you everything. A home, security, a place where you could be yourself without fear. And you repaid his generosity by stealing his most precious possession." "Danny isn't property," Tessa said. "He's my son. He's much more than that, and you know it. The bloodline doesn't lie, Tessa. He's the key to everything Mr. Reeves has been working toward. You can't keep him from his destiny forever." The burn in Tessa's chest was getting stronger now, spreading through her limbs like fire. How long had it been since she'd fed? Really fed, not the animal blood she'd been choking down to keep the worst of the hunger at bay. 5 days? 6? Too long. Far too long to be safe around humans, especially when stress and fear were making the monster stronger. "His destiny is to be a normal kid," she said. "To go to school, to have friends, to grow up without being afraid." "Normal?" The man laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Look at him, Tessa, really look. Tell me what you see." Against her will, Tessa's eyes found Danny behind the counter. 13 years old but small for his age. Pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, with dark circles under eyes that seemed older than they should. And when he looked at her, really looked, she saw something there that made her heart break all over again. He knew, had always known on some level what she was, what they both were. "The transformation will begin soon," Leatherjacket continued, "with or without Mr. Reeves's guidance. Do you really want him to go through that alone? Do you want him to wake up one morning with blood on his hands and no understanding of what he's become?" "Shut up." The words came out with more force than Tessa intended, and she saw Mike flinch behind the counter. "Or perhaps you're hoping he won't survive it," the man said, tilting his head like a curious dog. "Some don't, you know. The change is violent, unpredictable. Bodies sometimes reject what they're becoming, but with proper care, proper preparation." I said shut up. The hunger was roaring now, demanding attention, demanding satisfaction. Tessa could smell the blood of every person in the store. Mike's, sharp with adrenaline and confusion. The 3 strangers, metallic and somehow wrong, tainted by something she didn't want to identify. And Danny's, sweet and familiar and absolutely forbidden. "Mom?" Danny's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Your eyes are..." She looked at her reflection in the store's window and saw what he saw. Eyes that had gone from brown to black, pupils dilated until they swallowed almost all the color. The change was beginning whether she wanted it or not, her body responding to threat and hunger in the only way it knew how. "Behind the counter, Danny. Don't come out no matter what happens." "Tessa," Leatherjacket said, his voice taking on a warning tone, "you don't want to do this, not in front of the boy." But Tessa was past caring about what anyone wanted. The 3 men had made their choice when they'd cornered her here, when they'd threatened her son, when they'd spoken about him like he was livestock to be collected. The monster she'd spent 13 years keeping caged was finally free, and it was hungry. The transformation was always painful, bones elongating and reshaping, muscles expanding, teeth growing sharp enough to tear through flesh and bone. But this time it felt different, not just painful but necessary, righteous even. This was what she was made for, not hiding, not running, but protecting the one thing in the world that mattered. She heard Mike scream as her fingernails became claws, heard the strangers shouting to each other as they realized their carefully planned retrieval had become something else entirely. But all of that seemed distant, unimportant, compared to the singular focus that now consumed her. The first man reached for his weapon too slowly. Tessa was across the store and on him before his hand reached his jacket. her teeth finding the soft spot where his neck met his shoulder. The taste of his blood was wrong, corrupted by chemicals she didn't recognize, but it was blood, and she was starving. The second man managed to draw his gun, but guns were human weapons, and she was no longer entirely human. She moved faster than his eyes could track, staying low, using the store's shelving for cover. When she reached him, she didn't hesitate. The third man ran. Tessa let him go, let him carry word back to Reeves about what had happened here, about the cost of threatening her family. Let him spread fear among the others who might be tempted to continue the hunt. She stood in the wreckage of the gas station, surrounded by the smell of blood and fear, and slowly felt her body returning to human form. The hunger was satisfied for now, the monster fed and temporarily content, but she knew it wouldn't last. It never did. "Mom?" Danny's voice was small, frightened but not horrified, not disgusted. When she turned to face him, she expected to see revulsion in his eyes, expected him to finally understand why they had to keep running, why they could never have a normal life. Instead, she saw acceptance, and something else, relief maybe, that the pretending was finally over. "Are they dead?" he asked. Tessa nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good," Danny said simply. "They were going to hurt us." Mike the clerk stood behind his counter, shaking like a leaf, his eyes wide with shock but alive. He would remember this night for the rest of his life, would never quite believe what he had seen, but he would live. That was something. "We have to go," Tessa said. "Right now." Danny nodded and moved to the door without argument. They had been running for so long that it had become routine. Pack fast, leave no traces, always be ready for the next escape. But as they walked toward the Honda, Danny caught her hand with his small one. "Mom," he said, "when it happens to me, when I change, will you teach me how to control it?" The question hit her like a physical blow. All these years, she had been hoping against hope that the bloodline would skip him, that he would grow up normal and human and safe. But looking at him now, she could see the signs she had been deliberately ignoring: the pale skin, the sensitivity to bright light, the way he sometimes stared at people's throats when he thought no one was looking. "Yes," she said, because there was no other answer she could give. "I'll teach you everything I know." They drove through the night in silence, the gas station disappearing behind them like a bad dream. But Tessa knew it wasn't over, would never be over. Reeves wouldn't give up, wouldn't stop sending hunters, wouldn't accept that some things couldn't be owned or controlled. But for tonight, they were alive and together and free. For tonight, that was enough. As dawn approached, Tessa pulled into a rest area and killed the engine. They would sleep through the day in the car, she and her son, the vampire, and her half-human child, who would soon be neither entirely one thing nor the other. And when night fell again, they would continue running, deeper into the American darkness where monsters could hide among the ordinary people and families could be whatever they needed to be to survive. Danny was already asleep, his head against the window, his breathing steady and peaceful. Tessa watched him for a long time, memorizing his face while he still looked fully human, still looked like the innocent child she had been trying so hard to protect. Soon, very soon, that innocence would be gone forever. But maybe, if she was careful, if she taught him well, they could build something new from what remained. Not normal, that had never been possible, but something that might pass for it in the dark spaces between human understanding. The hunger stirred restlessly in her chest, already beginning to wake despite the night's feeding. It was always hungry now, always demanding more. But she would master it, as she had learned to master it years ago when Danny was small and helpless and completely dependent on her restraint. She was his mother. She was his protector, and when the time came, she would be his teacher in the arts of survival that no other parent would ever need to know. Outside the car windows, snow continued to fall, covering their tracks and offering the promise of invisibility for at least a few more hours. Tessa closed her eyes and tried to sleep, dreaming of a future where running would no longer be necessary. where her son could be what he was meant to become, without fear of those who would use him or destroy him. It was an impossible dream, she knew, but it was hers, and she would fight for it with every drop of blood in her veins and every tooth in her head, until there was nothing left of either of them but dust and memory. The winter wind howled around the car, carrying secrets and promises and the distant sound of pursuit that would never entirely fade. But for now, in this moment, they were safe and together and alive, and sometimes that was the most any monster could hope for.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.